Portugal is burning, and this might be its worst wildfire season in years. While the world watches other global crises, Portugal is battling an unprecedented fire emergency that has already consumed over 216,000 hectares of land. We're talking about record-breaking heat, devastating drought, and high winds creating the perfect storm for destruction. This isn't just another fire season, it's a climate catastrophe unfolding in real time across the Iberian Peninsula.
Southern Europe is experiencing one of its worst wildfire seasons in 2 decades, with Spain and Portugal among the hardest hit. So far this year, an estimated 850,000 acres, an area equivalent to the size of the island of Majorca, has burned in Spain, according to the European Forest Fire Information System. The fires have been fanned by strong winds and a heat wave spanning more than 2 weeks, which sent temperatures up to 113 degrees Fahrenheit over the weekend, according to the state weather agency.
To understand the scale of this crisis, we need to look at the numbers, and they're staggering. Portugal has experienced 216,000 hectares burned since the start of 2025, according to the latest reports. That's equivalent to over 533,000 acres, nearly 500,000 football pitches worth of land reduced to ash and char. To put this in perspective, this represents a 17-fold increase compared to the same period in 2024. Think about that for a moment. 17 times more land has burned this year than last year at this point. The speed of destruction is equally alarming. Nearly half of this year's total burned area was consumed in just 2 days during the peak of the crisis. 2 days. That's how quickly an entire landscape can be transformed from green forests and agricultural land into blackened wasteland. But Portugal isn't suffering alone. The entire Iberian Peninsula is under siege from wildfires. Spain has lost over 382,000 hectares this year, setting a new national record for its worst fire season ever, surpassing even the devastating record set just 3 years ago.
Now, this year's fires have now surpassed all previous records, including 2022, making it Spain's worst wildfire season since monitoring began nearly 20 years ago. Now, according to the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service, the fires and other across southern Europe have also released record levels of smoke and greenhouse gases.
Together, Spain and Portugal have seen over 600,000 hectares burned, creating an environmental and humanitarian crisis that stretches across international borders. The human cost is equally devastating. Multiple fatalities have been reported, including firefighters who died trying to save communities and civilians caught in the path of fast-moving flames. One particularly tragic incident involved a former mayor who died fighting fires in his own parish, embodying the desperate, all-hands-on-deck mentality that has gripped Portuguese communities. Emergency services are stretched beyond their limits. Over 2,000 firefighters have been deployed across northern and central Portugal, with about half concentrated in the hardest-hit town of Arganil. These aren't just local firefighters. Portugal has activated the European Union's civil protection mechanism, calling for international assistance. Fireboss aircraft from Europe and Canadair firefighting planes from Morocco have been deployed to reinforce national efforts. The scale of international cooperation reflects just how overwhelming this crisis has become for Portuguese authorities. The geographical impact reveals the scale of the crisis. The fires have primarily affected northern and central Portugal, with districts like Aveiro, Viseu, and Coimbra bearing the brunt of the destruction. In Aveiro alone, around 20,000 hectares have burned, particularly affecting municipalities like Oliveira de Azeméis, Albergaria Avelha, and Severity. These aren't remote wilderness areas, they're communities where people live, work, and raise families. Entire villages have been evacuated, with residents forced to flee with little more than the clothes on their backs.
Criminal. We had to run because the fire was coming from all sides, from everywhere, from above, from below, from everywhere.
Signs of destruction stretch across the province, from the mountains to the villages. Plumes of smoke hang in the air, forcing people to wear masks. And homes stand in ruins.
That was my house.
Officials warn the blazes
Local mayors report dozens of houses destroyed, with many more under threat. The town of Sever de Vuga became completely surrounded by forest fires, creating scenes reminiscent of apocalyptic movies as thick smoke and flames encircled the community. Firefighters working around the clock describe an apocalyptic landscape of ash and smoke.
Firefighters have spent the night trying to battle the blaze here as well. They've managed to control it here, as you can see, but it's left an apocalyptic landscape behind, full of ashes. The smoke is hanging heavily in the air. You can feel it when you breathe, dry and acrid.
But what's driving this unprecedented destruction? The answer lies in a perfect storm of climate conditions that scientists have been warning about for years. Portugal has endured what Prime Minister Luis Montenegro described as 24 days of weather conditions of unprecedented severity. We're talking about record-breaking heat that has pushed temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius across much of the country. In some areas, temperatures have soared as high as 46 degrees Celsius. That's nearly 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez confirmed similar conditions, acknowledging the worst heatwave duration since 1975.
Since 1975, Spain has not experienced a heat wave of this duration. What does this mean? It means that, regardless of the cause of the fires, it is clear, as science tells us and common sense tells us, especially for farmers and ranchers, those who live in rural areas, that the climate is changing and that the climate emergency is worsening.
These aren't just hot days, they're heat domes, where high-pressure systems trap hot air over regions for extended periods. The heat is compounded by severe drought conditions that have turned forests and agricultural land into tinderboxes. Portugal's annual precipitation has been decreasing by about 90 millimeters per decade, and 2025 has been particularly dry. The combination of extreme heat and lack of moisture creates the perfect conditions for fires to ignite easily and spread rapidly. High winds have acted as the third element in this deadly triangle, fanning flames and pushing fires across landscapes faster than firefighting efforts can contain them. These aren't normal weather patterns, they're the manifestation of climate change that scientists have been predicting. Portugal's average annual temperature has been increasing since the 1970s at a rate of 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. The number of tropical nights and summer days has increased dramatically, as have the intensity and duration of heat waves. Climate scientists explain that the Mediterranean region is warming faster than other regions across the continent.
Of course, we know that Spain has always experienced hot summers and we have high temperatures. It's not a new phenomenon also to have heat wave, but the extent, the ferocity, and the long-lasting heat wave we are having now cannot be explained without climate change. They are also starting earlier in the year. We already experienced a strong heat wave in June, and now again this 2 weeks long-lasting heat wave, which is completely unprecedented. Spain is also warming much faster than other regions in the world, which makes of the Mediterranean region a hotspot for climate change. So all experts agree climate change is definitely playing a big role in this equation.
What we're seeing in 2025 isn't an anomaly. It's the new normal that climate scientists have been warning about. The Portuguese government's response reveals the severity of the situation. Prime Minister Montenegro declared a state of calamity for the hardest-hit areas, invoking emergency powers to mobilize additional firefighters and civil servants. He made a direct appeal to the nation, saying, "We are at war, and we must triumph in this fight." This isn't political rhetoric, it's the language of a country facing an existential threat to entire regions. The government has also taken aggressive action against those who might be contributing to the crisis. Portuguese National Police arrested 7 men suspected of starting wildfires, and authorities have prohibited the use of heavy farming equipment to reduce the risk of accidentally starting new blazes. The message is clear: in a tinderbox environment, any spark can become a catastrophe. The economic implications are staggering. Portugal's agricultural sector, already struggling with drought conditions, is facing massive losses. Farms, forests, and rural infrastructure worth millions of euros have been destroyed. The tourism industry, crucial to Portugal's economy, is also being impacted as smoke and fire danger force closures of popular destinations and create air quality hazards that extend far beyond the fire zones. But the environmental cost may be even more significant. Portugal's forests are critical carbon sinks that help mitigate climate change. When they burn, not only is that carbon-absorbing capacity lost, but the fires themselves release massive amounts of stored carbon back into the atmosphere. It's a vicious cycle where climate change fuels fires, which in turn accelerate climate change. The biodiversity loss is equally concerning. Portuguese forests are home to unique ecosystems and species that may take decades to recover, if they recover at all. Some areas may be so severely damaged that they never return to their previous state, permanently altering the landscape and ecological balance of entire regions. International cooperation has become essential. Beyond the firefighting aircraft from Morocco and European nations, neighboring Spain is sharing resources and expertise. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez called the ongoing operations probably the largest European civil protection mobilization in history. This level of coordination reflects not just the current crisis, but the recognition that climate-driven disasters are becoming too large for any single nation to handle alone. The smoke and air quality impacts extend far beyond Portugal's borders. Thick smoke has reached Spain, France, and even parts of Northern Europe, carrying particulate matter that poses health risks to millions of people. PM 2.5 concentrations have exceeded World Health Organization safety levels across large parts of the Iberian Peninsula, creating a public health crisis that compounds the immediate fire emergency. Looking at the broader context, Portugal's crisis is part of a larger pattern affecting southern Europe. The entire Mediterranean region is experiencing what many scientists are calling the worst wildfire season on record. Greece, Italy, France, and other countries are simultaneously battling major fires, stretching European firefighting resources to their limits and highlighting the continent-wide nature of the climate crisis. The timing couldn't be worse. August is typically peak fire season in southern Europe, and with several more weeks of hot, dry weather predicted, the crisis is far from over. Weather forecasts show little relief in sight, with temperatures expected to remain elevated and precipitation unlikely. This means that even as current fires are brought under control, the risk of new ignitions remains extremely high. The human stories emerging from the crisis reveal both tragedy and heroism. Firefighters are working around-the-clock shifts, often sleeping in their vehicles between calls. Local residents are using garden hoses, buckets, and even tree branches to defend their homes when official resources aren't available. Communities are coming together to evacuate elderly residents and animals, creating informal support networks that reflect the social solidarity that emerges in times of crisis. But there are also stories of loss that will haunt communities for years. Families have lost homes that represented generations of work and memories. Farmers have watched livestock perish and crops destroyed just before harvest. Small businesses that depend on rural tourism are facing bankruptcy as their customer base evacuates and their natural attractions burn. The psychological impact on affected communities cannot be understated. Living through a wildfire crisis creates lasting trauma, particularly for children who may develop long-term anxiety about fire and extreme weather. The constant threat, the smell of smoke, the orange skies, and the need for sudden evacuations create a state of chronic stress that affects entire populations. Portugal's response also reveals important lessons about climate adaptation. The country has been developing climate resilience policies for years, recognizing that extreme weather events would become more frequent and severe. However, the scale and speed of the 2025 fire season has exceeded even pessimistic projections, highlighting the challenge of preparing for climate impacts that are accelerating faster than anticipated. The international dimension of the crisis is particularly significant. Portugal's request for EU assistance and the rapid response from multiple European nations demonstrates both the benefits of regional cooperation and the recognition that climate disasters transcend national boundaries. Morocco's assistance with firefighting aircraft shows how climate cooperation is extending beyond traditional regional alliances. Technology is playing an increasingly important role in the response. Satellite monitoring from the European Copernicus system provides real-time data on fire extent and behavior. Drones are being used for surveillance and assessment in areas too dangerous for human access. Weather monitoring systems are providing crucial data for predicting fire behavior and planning evacuation routes. However, technology also reveals the limitations of current firefighting approaches. Despite advanced monitoring and international cooperation, the fires have repeatedly outpaced containment efforts. This highlights the need for more fundamental changes in land management, urban planning, and climate mitigation rather than just improved emergency response. The broader implications for Europe are profound. If a relatively small country like Portugal can experience such devastating fires, what might happen when similar conditions affect larger nations with greater population densities? The 2025 fire season is providing a preview of the climate challenges that will face all of Southern Europe in coming decades. Prevention and adaptation strategies are becoming as important as firefighting capabilities. Portugal is investing in forest management practices designed to reduce fire risk, including controlled burns during safer conditions and creating fire breaks that can slow fire spread. However, these long-term strategies take years to implement. While the climate crisis is accelerating rapidly, the economic costs of the 2025 fire season will likely run into billions of euros when all damages are calculated. This includes not just immediate losses from destroyed property and infrastructure, but also long-term impacts on tourism, agriculture, and ecosystem services. These costs are prompting discussions about whether it's more economical to invest heavily in prevention and climate mitigation rather than continuing to respond to increasingly severe disasters. Public health impacts extend far beyond the immediate fire zones. The smoke and air pollution from massive fires affect respiratory health across entire regions. Hospitals in Portugal and Spain have reported increased admissions for asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other respiratory conditions. The elderly and children are particularly vulnerable, creating additional strain on healthcare systems already dealing with the direct casualties from fires. The 2025 Portugal wildfire crisis represents more than just a natural disaster. It's a preview of the climate future that awaits much of Southern Europe. The combination of record-breaking heat, severe drought, and high winds that created this perfect storm for destruction will become increasingly common as global temperatures continue to rise. Portugal's experience offers crucial lessons for other nations facing similar risks. International cooperation is essential, but it must be paired with massive investments in prevention, climate adaptation, and ultimately, global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The alternative is a future where fire seasons like 2025 become the norm rather than the exception, threatening entire regions with repeated cycles of destruction and recovery. As reporters on the ground witness the hardest-hit areas, the immediate focus remains on containing active fires and protecting communities still under threat. But the broader questions raised by this crisis about climate adaptation, international cooperation, and the pace of environmental change will continue long after the last ember is extinguished. Portugal's battle against the flames is far from over, but it's already clear that this fire season will be remembered as a turning point in the country's relationship with climate change and extreme weather.